Welcome to Stuck, Time to Improv. I'm Mary Scott with BusinessRiff, and I want startups to be wildly successful. I'm so happy we're talking to an investor today, and it's Alex Chompff from Evolution Ventures, right?
That's right.
So, Alex, thank you for coming.
Sure. Happy to be here. Happy to have an opportunity to share with your community and appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Mary.
So, what sorts of things can a startup present that's going to make an investor lean in?
Probably most of the people that are listening to this are pretty early stage startups. And as early stage startups, probably they're going to be dealing, first of all, with friends and family or angel investors rather than professional investors. Because usually professional investors are looking for projects that have been de-risked to a certain extent. And so probably for most of your community, they're going to be talking to people that they know or people who are 1 or 2 degrees away from people that they know and who are personally interested in what they're doing. And so I think the most important thing that you can bring to that encounter is a narrative, a story, an understanding about why you're in the world and what you're here to do and what it is that your company is here to do. Without that story, without that narrative, probably the single biggest problem that startup founders have, and probably the single biggest misunderstanding around startups, is that a startup founder creates something from nothing. Right. This is very amazing. This is really like to think about that. You're creating something from nothing. Where nothing was before, you are creating something. And that act of creation, that's by sheer force of will. And that starts by talking your business into existence. That starts by discussing it with the people around you and sharing with the people around you. So having a narrative that's powerful and compelling and practiced is probably going to be the first place that you need to start when it comes to raising funds. And then, right behind that, there are some basic deliverables that you're going to want to have. And I'm sure everybody's heard of pitch decks and, you know, uh, agreements to purchase equity and so forth and so on. What I'm going to say with respect to the marketing materials is create them in-house, but make sure they're professional and presentable. But bring them from you. Don't outsource your marketing materials. Make sure you can tell your own story. Make sure you understand what's happening in your business. And then when it comes to all that legal stuff, I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and make the investment early on. Maybe use the first few $1,000s that you get from your investors to create the legal framework that will keep everybody safe and protected later on.
All right. Let's go back to the narrative a bit. Um, People have to see your passion, right? They want to know that you are solving a problem, but why are you solving this particular problem? And what gets you up in the morning to go and do that, right?
I think it's axiomatic that if you're going to speak something into existence, you're going to have to be its most passionate believer. And that's going to have to come through because if you can't convince yourself, then you're certainly not going to convince anyone else. It's interesting because it's kind of a fine line between being hard-headed and not taking advice and not understanding when people are trying to coach you or help you. And at the same time, sticking to your vision and understanding what you're trying to create and making sure that you communicate that powerfully and that you're resistant to the erosion that will come in every conversation.
Right. So until a company actually has some traction, an investor is going to be looking at the founder and how they approach it and what their plans are, right?
Well, the importance of the leadership team is never going to diminish. Even with traction, even with revenue, any investor, whether it's at the earliest stages before anything gets going, or there's a whole universe of finance and there's a whole universe of startup and growth funding and exit funding and exit capitalization. A lot of things going on. Later on, it still matters who's leading the team. It's still going to be the first thing that any acquirer or purchaser or the public is going to ask about your company. So that never stops being important, and it really points to the criticality. I would think of, among other things, having the right heart and mindset when you begin the journey, because you're going to be the one sustaining yourself for much of the journey. And it's important to know why you're on the journey and what it is that you hope to accomplish. And I would hope that all of your listeners who are on the entrepreneurial journey would lead with integrity and ethics in all of their doings, especially their capitalistic ones.
Right. And understand your own why. I always tell my startups that you need three people on your team. You need the marketing person, the accountant, and the lawyer. Because
Hmm.
the marketing person helps you make money, the accountant helps you keep most of it, and the lawyer stops you from losing it.
That's funny. That's true. And then that I assume that, you're talking to most CEOs, or what we would think of as product-based CEOs. And so you're saying surround yourself with the other legs of the stool, which are finance and marketing, and put the legal protections into place. That's very true. There's a good friend of ours named Ernesto Ciroli who teaches a kind of enterprise facilitation, and whose methodologies have created tens of thousands of businesses around the world. And he really talks about that three-legged stool, and would very much agree with you that a product-based person, a market-based person, and a finance-based person, those are all three things that are very important to have when you're building that initial team. Although I would say don't confuse a market-based person with a marketing person. Marketing is another kind of product. A
Right.
market-based person is a kind of personality, and that's the kind of personality that's not going to go to sleep if it doesn't shake 100 hands today. Before you're looking for someone who's carrying the message and who's constantly discovering what's needed in the world and bringing that information back to the leadership team so that the leadership team can respond with new products and services.
And whether you have a product or a service that you're providing, your market may be bigger than just online. So just because social media is fun and something you're very used to doesn't necessarily mean it's the only place to get the word out.
Social media is obviously an important marketing medium in 2026. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, in a world of 8 billion people, there are a large number of them that are never going to look at social media today.
What kinds of things do you particularly look for when a founder is coming to you for investment?
Well, first and foremost, I look for personal integrity. I look for character. I served in the military. I have a sort of test, which is, would I spend the evening in a dark, wet foxhole with you? Would I go to sleep and trust you to keep an eye on things, right? And if not, then I really don't. I'm probably not going to invest in you. So there are some things, related to your conduct as an individual and your goals and aspirations as a member of society that wants to be on the capitalistic side. I'd like to know what your heart is about. Once we've had that conversation, or once we've established that as a baseline, then there are some things that characterize venture businesses or venture candidate businesses. But I'd say it's very, very important to understand that probably 95, 97% of the businesses out there are not for venture capital, which is where I specialize. As a venture capitalist, I'm looking for very, very specific things. I'm looking for things that scale very well, that are typically not subject to the laws of physics, that have opportunities that are just so tremendous that it's worth taking the risk that my capital will go to zero. Because most venture capital investments, especially at the early stages, are going to fail.
Well, thank you so much, Alex Chompff from Evolution Ventures Management Fund. I really appreciate you coming today. We'll put those links in the comments. And I'm Mary Scott with Business Riff. I want startups to be wildly successful. And one of the best things you can do to accomplish that is book a call with me at businessriff.com. And join us again next time for Stuck, Time to Improv.